A presentation right now?
Yes, I am.
Perfect, perfect. So, what I want to cover today, this is my regularly scheduled Tuesday pulse of AI, and today I want to just talk about NotebookLM, which is a Google tool. If you haven't used it, it's very versatile and it can do a lot of things that you may not have considered using AI for. And so, this is going to be how to turn documents you already have into useful information. And so, what most people are using AI right now is like they prompt in and they get an answer out, and they often lose context. And so, this is a way to use your own data that doesn't go out to the internet unless you tell it to, but it's how to get answers from bad data that you may have and find out ways that you can improve that data. So,
Is this Notebook LM? Yes.
yes.
Okay. Yeah, I've used it. So,
Okay.
yes,
So
please.
you may not have used it in a way like this, but I'm going to talk about how to a standard business may have used it, and this might actually help you with how you work with clients because you may have documents from all over the place and you don't remember where they are. And so if you can create a collection of them and bring them into NotebookLM, this will allow you to work with just that. And it cites where the answers came from within the documents that you provided it. It remembers the context within your notebook that you're using. It's not a browser. It's not a creative writing engine. It's not an automation tool. It's how to get more useful information from information that you have provided it. So simple, it's you use whatever tool to create your information, you put that into NotebookLM, turns that information into understanding, and then you have the human in the loop to actually make the decisions and act upon whatever information NotebookLM provides. And it's not agents. Somehow afterwards you get your information, then you can automate with an agent if you find that useful or necessary. So before we go into using that, I have a collection of documents that I'll be using for this. First is a poorly defined standard operating procedure of when a client signs in, when a welcome email comes out, we collect the information using a form, but not all clients fill it out. The project setup happens with a project management tool, but there's not a template. So access to share folders is granted after a kickoff. And then billing usually happens in parallel, but sometimes they get delayed. And so it's not a very well-defined standard operating procedure, but it's a start. Then we have a proposal that we sent out to the client saying, here's what we're going to do, a leadership discovery. It's documenting your current workflows, delivering recommendations for improvement. Very simple project scope.
Mhm.
Give the timelines, give the responsibilities, and what the payment terms are. After that, we have a few different notes taken from leadership meetings. And so for the last few weeks, we just had simple documents for 3 different leadership meetings. Then we had the raw notes from a client kickoff, mentioned previous vendor delays, asked about weekly updates, they're concerned about automation, unclear who owns a scope. So it's messy data. And the last one is just some basic email threads. The client said, we thought this would include implementation, not just recommendations, proposal focused on discovery and documentation. So back and forth, very simple email thread. So using all that, if we go into NotebookLM, you are already familiar with that, but
Mhm.
it's notebooklm.google.com, and it is a free tool that you can create your own notebooks. Each notebook has its own context. And so for this one, I'm going to create a new notebook, and I'm going to call this Alpha Project. And I'm going to add some sources. And for this, I'm just going to go to my Google Drive and go to my drive and the notebook that I just looked at. And I'm going to grab these 7 documents
Mhm.
and insert them into the project. So now that the project, it's looking at all those documents and it's going through and it's saying, oh, here's a trouble on client onboarding and project management workflow suffers from lack of standardization. It analyzed everything and figured out what you wanted to do with that. Inconsistent administrative habits. It's confusing regarding what the project scope and implementation are. The transcripts persistent tension between sales and operations. And so it already analyzed what it thinks these documents are all about. So if we go back to the presentation, the first step would be to get source grounded answers. So it will only use what you've uploaded, so you don't have to worry about hallucinating. It's not going to give you some sounds right, and it's perfect for improving your standard operating procedures and for policies and client work. So if we go back into NotebookLM, we'll just go back one more slide here. We'll ask it various questions. Where does the process break down most often? What steps rely on individual judgment? Are assumptions overlooked? This gives you, replaces rereading. You don't have to find your new context. It shows the citations and it builds trust within how you're looking at your data. So, for example, we'll go back in here and we'll start asking those questions. And I use a tool called WhisperFlow, and so I can just talk into this instead of typing because my typing is not the best. And so, where does this process break down most often? And we go into here, and it's now analyzing the sources. It's breaking down your ideas, and based on the provided, the process breaks down most frequently between sales and operations, most likely regarding information gathering, scope alignment, and standardized workflows. The prominent breakdowns include inconsistent intake, give some ideas on that, misalignment of expectations and scope, shows you where the fall-offs are and how to improve them, ambiguous authority. There's a lack of standardized internal workflows. And so the analogy is the current process is a relay race where runners aren't sure where the handoff zone is. Sales is focused on speed. They drop the baton, pass it to operations before it's ready to grab it. There's no standard grip on the baton. The teams spend more time picking up off the ground than actually running the race. So the next question comes in, and we can ask it, what steps rely on individual judgment instead of standard rule? Go back here, and it's again analyzing all of those various documents and coming up with the breakdown is the lack of standardized rules, basically. They rely on discretion, timing, and individual habits of the staff instead of a well-documented approach. So in the onboarding, the welcome email, there's no fixed rule. The intake follow-up, when the form is used, there's no automation or standardized procedure for handling incomplete data. It shows that your form needs to be improved. Granting folder access is only happens. Is there a possible way to automate this to make it faster? Project management, it's talking about your task creation. There's no standard template for a project, and so each one is run differently. There's no standardization, so again, something that really can't be automated that easily. Again, going through documentation consistency, your scope and expectation management, handling of quick charges, payment terms. Billing delays occur because the terms are sometimes not clearly defined. So again, it's looking in and finding out, here's your processes. It's like running a kitchen without a recipe book. You got a lot of general ideas of what the dish should be, but each chef uses their own ingredients. Everything is not the same. Different results every time, different projects every time. No consistency. There's no standard recipe. So now we can ask, what assumptions are being made about client behavior? Once again, you can find out where the gaps are in how we're handling, how clients are dealing with interaction with your company. And so the assumptions about the scope, they intuitively understand the boundary between recommendation and implementation. That's an assumption. It's not a truism. Clients prioritize deal velocity over structured onboarding. That is another bad assumption. Um, you have assumptions about information and communications, that clients will provide all your complete information via forms. If the forms aren't asking for required useful information, they're not going to provide that. And so you have, again, incomplete data for every project because you're not getting consistent data back from each client. They know what levels of data are required for these requests. That's a bad assumption. Clients will proactively ask what they need, and they don't always do that. And so, again, it's assuming things are going to work because that's the way either the sales or operations people think that things will work. The clients are all going to act differently because they're providing inconsistent data. So it's like a seasoned traveler who has already read the guidebook. They assume the traveler knows exactly what to pack and what boundaries are the tour, the scope, and the client is often arriving confused, without a ticket, expecting the tour guide not only to show up, but give them a map and drive the bus. And that is a bad thing to happen. So, going back to the presentation, we can then go look at things like cross-document synthesis. Humans think literally, and businesses create patterns. And so here we can look at questions to look at, such as what issues keep resurfacing. So going back into here, again, we're working with these same 7 documents, but we're asking for a completely different idea. So what themes repeat across these meetings? Get the gist, looking at the meeting notes, finding insights, analyzing, and tension between velocity and process standardization, speed versus structure, uh, operational frustrations. Operations is a broader team. Frustration finds there's no standardized processing. You have manual workarounds and often baked because the forms are incomplete. You have ambiguity in the scope of deliverables, the recommendations versus implementations, and how that's communicated to the clients. Scope creep is a huge thing because they want quick changes instead of staying to the original documented standard scope. You don't have clear authority during the kickoff calls. Nobody's in charge. The client side actually doesn't know who's in power and who approves changes. So again, here we have an organization operating like a restaurant where the front house and the kitchen are speaking in 2 different languages. The servers are focused on seating customers quickly and keeping them happy, and the chefs are struggling because the orders are coming out with what do they really want to eat. There's no master menu. There's no possibility of order slips and things like that. And so the kitchen is guessing and the servers are promising, and they don't come synchronized. So now let's say, what issues keep resurfacing? As we go through more analysis, the incomplete information and manual intake, incomplete intake forms, insufficient request details, the velocity versus the process standoff between your 2 operations and sales teams. Recommendations versus implementations and how that's communicated to the client. Making these quick changes is often a problem with scope creep. And so here you're trapped in a Groundhog Day workflow. Every project starts the same missing information, the same scope confusion, yet the organization refuses to standardize their documentation, get a standard operating procedure that has all these holes filled in. We can also say, what decisions are being avoided? We go through and once again, going through and figuring out where the holes in the communications are and how we can improve your email templating, your process template, your project management templates, but there's often no assigned owner, there's undocumented actions, there's ambiguity in who to contact, there's no standard setup, no templates, terms of payment are vague, they aren't clearly agreed on up front, there's no sign off. So this is a leadership like a homeowner who knows the roof is leaking but refuses to hire a contractor because they don't want to deal with the noise of the repairs. They discuss the buckets catching the water every week, but they avoid the decision to actually fix the roof because they're too focused on just doing their philosophy or their daily routine. So, another idea is question driven thinking. This shines when you ladder questions, not craft the perfect prompt, but think in what's happening and why, where is this breaking, and what assumptions exist. So, similar to the synthesis, we're looking at a thinking ladder and we're asking, what is happening across these documents? And as it synthesizes all of that data, the conflict between speed and structure. Again, there's regarding standardization versus sales momentum. There's operational bottlenecks. There's the proposed solution that doesn't have a standardized intake step. So again, it keeps pointing to the same type of things that can be improved with better client intake, better communications of what's recommended versus implementation. You have to improve your workflows because they're inconsistent with different people doing different things. You don't have a formalized onboarding process. It happens differently for each customer depending on if sales or ops started the deal. You have fragmented tooling. You're finding billing delays because payment terms are not clearly agreed on. There's client anxiety. So it's like building an airplane while it's in flight. The pilots and mechanics are working on different manuals. Pilots want to go faster and get there better and closing the deal, while the mechanics are trying to keep the engine running. With no one writing down the flight plan, where they find themselves fixing the same engine failures every single trip because they're not documented. Looking further into this, so why is this happening? As we keep going on, there's more questions that you can come up with. So again, it gives you a great breakdown of why it happens. There's a resistance to standardization. There's a fear of friction between leadership and sales. There's a lack of assigned ownership. Again, finding these things early and documenting and filling the holes are just going to make things run smoother and more consistent. It's happening because the organization is running just in time without a warehouse. So they take the orders as fast as possible, which you've probably seen, and while operations is in the back trying to build the products without a parts list, leadership refuses to build the warehouse, standardizing your processes for fear of slowing down orders. They just want sales, cash flow, and they keep running into the same roadblocks, which will probably lead to client churn, and it's not overall good. You may get constant sales, but if you don't keep the customer, how long are you going to keep that up? Then one last question here. What assumptions exist? So now it's looking for answers and finding all your key assumptions. And there's a lot of assumptions throughout this because, again, poor documentation, poor workflows, inconsistency. Clients will provide complete data. Clients know what level of data is required. Primary contact has decision-making authority. So this is like, again, the tour guide who assumes every traveler has everything memorized and they know what they're going to be going, and they may know more than what the tour guide actually is going to be providing them. So they bought all their supplies. They know who the group leader is, but when the travelers show up confused, the guide spends more time fixing the problems of each traveler rather than leading the actual tour. So going back into the next feature that you could use is the thinking ladder, the same documents, better answers. So we'll go from structure to chaos. It turns messy material into usable structure. You can give it open questions, you can make decision lists, you can find responsibility gaps, you can find missing information. So looking at this, we'll say, let's turn this into a list of, we'll ask it that now. So turn this into a list of open questions and next decisions. And this was, again, just based on a bad standard operating procedure, some internal leadership notes, the email thread between the customers, the communications with the proposal in the email threads. So this was, again, the open questions are, what are the specific examples of impact? Who has the final authority? What specific details are missing? How can we document accountability? What is the implementation handoff? What are my next steps? Finding the assignment of documentation ownership, projecting project standardization. Talking too much today. And so the analogy here is that it's in a huddle during the game with no playbook. They're going on the fly. Again, everything is different because there's no standard operating procedure. There's no standard communications templates. There's no standard project plan. Going back into here, the next thing that you could do with it would be to get persistent context, because it remembers. Most AI forgets unless you're using things like ChatGPT projects or Claude artifacts where you can try to keep everything within a single project. That's the same way that NotebookLM is remembering. You're creating each project, each notebook is a project with its own memory, with its own history, and with continuity. And so beyond whatever you're doing with this, we'll go into one last thing and ask it to say, what has remained unresolved throughout this project? So once again, reviewing everything, finding out the unresolved problems, and the standard intake process is the most prominent unresolved issues is the standardized intake step. There's stagnation, there's leadership deferral, there's a current status. Scope has not been fully defined, there's no change authority, you have ambiguous authority. So here we're looking at the ship's crew trying to fix the leak while a captain refuses to stop the engines. They keep trying to make it go faster, make it seem better, bring in that cash flow, but the operations is trying to keep the water from rising, and the leadership is focused on reaching the next port, so getting that velocity again. Bringing consistency into this is going to help this project with standard documentation. And so let's ask one last question and ask, what risks are increasing over time? So now, trying to do a little risk analysis. And the operational paralysis and team burnout. There's persistent inefficiencies, growing frustration, you have stalled problem solving, deferred decisions, lack of accountability, meetings are not documented, there's no action items that have assigned people to deal with that action. You have scope misalignment, there's legal and contractual disputes, unmanaged expectations, revenue delays because the terms haven't been fully fleshed out. There's loss of billable work. So this is like a growing city that refuses to build sewage system because it wants to focus on building new houses. And that's actually a pretty common problem here because they want to build these housing developments so quickly that they think that they can just put in septic tanks. But since I'm on the coast, septic tanks are susceptible to seawater leakage and spoiling the environment because they don't want to build in a infrastructure to handle all that waste. And so very prominent analogies. And so going back into here, what you can do with NotebookLM beyond what chat tools are. And again, this is complementary to chat tools because you can use your ChatGPT or your Claude or your Perplexity, get other data and use that as input to create these artifacts that you're using within each notebook that you create. So accuracy matters, decisions repeat, context expands. You can use the chat tools when you want to brainstorm, when you want to draft, you want to explore ideas, but when you want to analyze the actual data that you have and make decisions on that, that's where NotebookLM is going to be the tool of choice. So best thing to do is to start with one active project for one client and one process. Upload whatever relevant data, your meeting notes, your operating process, or your procedures, your proposals, Um, Avoid dumping everything and expecting a web search. Just focus on the materials that you have, find out where the holes are, where the processes are breaking down, and analyze your existing data before trying to analyze everything at once. So again, start with one process, one consistently inconsistent process. And then work to improve that. And so if your AI answers disappear, then you're renting intelligence. This will show you how to start owning it instead. And I believe that is the last slide. So if you haven't played around with other things, there's so many other options that you can do within this tool. For a free tool, it's amazingly powerful. There you can do audio overviews, which is basically whatever input that you give it, you can have it create a podcast with two people talking about
Right.
whatever
I've
documents you've
done that.
uploaded. You can have video overviews. You can create mind maps, reports, flashcards, quizzes, build infographics, slide decks. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with the data, but again, it's working with the data that you're providing, and it's not going out to the internet and assuming things. It's only helping you improve what you currently have. And on that, I will stop sharing